My name is Rachel Smith, and you are listening to Out to Lunch, the weekday afternoon jazz show here on WKCR. That's WKCR FM New York and WKCR HD 89.9 on the FM dial in the New York metropolitan area. WKCR.org online, and I promised you a guest this afternoon, and here he is, the wonderful Mr. Lloyd Haber. Welcome, Lloyd.
Thank you for having me, Rachel. Good afternoon.
We are very excited to talk about, to really go through a little bit of an abbreviated retrospective, if you'll indulge me, of your career before getting to your most recent album, First Dance with the Freedom Art Quartet. So you brought us a very special recording today that I think segues nicely into what I wanted to ask you about your own musical background, which one of the masters that you studied with, among others, was Ed Blackwell, who is perhaps best known for his work with Ornette Coleman, mostly in the 1960s, maybe a little bit into the 1970s, the early 1970s. Did you know that you wanted your music to sort of go in that musical direction when you were studying under Blackwell, when you were playing with Ornette Coleman?
Well, Rachel, before I studied with Blackwell, I had my first teacher was Charlie Persip, who I think I started studying with him in 1981, and I also went to Jazzmobile, where you had Freddie Waits there, and I took some lessons with Freddie Waits. And I would always explore the music and listen to WKCR. And that's where I first heard Blackwell and Ornette, and something just grabbed me. I didn't understand it, but I knew something was there, and I kept on listening and buying records. And I would go see Blackwell at every chance that I could get. And eventually, I started writing earlier than I met Blackwell. So I was inspired by many different artists that I had met up at Studio Whis, which was Warren Smith's studio on 21st Street. And eventually I asked Blackwell if he gave lessons. And he said, sure, you come out to New Haven and come on down. So I would drive back and forth to New Haven once a week to study with Blackwell, and I did that for a couple of years.
And you said you started writing before you were working with Blackwell. What was it that first inspired you to write?
Well, probably playing with Warren Smith. I got to be a member of Warren Smith's Composers Workshop Ensemble, and just being around these creative people, such as Charlie Persip, who I got to play with his band, and Warren and Marion Brown and Calapurusha, McIntyre. These people inspired me to be creative. I would rehearse one of my bands at Studio Whis, and Coleridge Taylor Perkinson would be there, and he would give comments on our rehearsals. And I would go to Studio Whis during the day sometimes when nobody was there, and just write music on the vibraphone. And there was music in my head.
I love that. That's a very good start. Let's actually listen to some music. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the recording that you brought in?
Well, I had always dreamed of meeting Ornette Coleman.
Who doesn't?
And I kind of knew where his studio was, but not quite. But I was be on the lookout. And one time I was at my friend was a manager at Broadway Panhandler down on West Broadway in Soho, and I think Ornette was in Soho at that time, and I was in the store, and I see Ornette coming up the street, but the doors were locked, and I couldn't get out. And I was like, Ornette,
Oh no!
And he walked on by. I was like, oh, it was so close. and then one time, years later, I was coming back from a marimba lesson, and I was walking towards Penn Station, and here comes Ornette walking up the street.
Was meant to be.
And I said, oh, Mr. Coleman. I introduced myself. I congratulated him on, I think he just won the MacArthur Fellowship, and told him that I was a student at Blackwell's. And he said, well, come on up. Here's my address. I was like, really? He said, sure. So the following week, I went up, got his address, went to the building, and there was no way to buzz in.
Oh no!
There was no like names on the buzzers. As I rang, nothing. I was like, I stood outside the building. Maybe he would come in, but I went away dejected. And then not long after that, Warren Smith said, hey, Lloyd, I'm going up to Ornette's to jam. You want to come with me?
Yes.
I'm like, yes. So fate was there, and went up to Ornette's, and Warren was jamming with Ornette, and Bern Nix was on guitar, and I think Ratso Harris was on bass. And Ornette had a little practice room in his apartment and a pool table. And I said, Ornette, can I have your phone number?
Call upstairs next time.
And so about once a week on Sundays, I would go up and spend the afternoons with Ornette. And we shared some wonderful times. And the first time we played together, it was like, it's like we always played together. It was just wonderful. So I recorded some of our sessions, and I would share them with Ornette. I'd give him the recordings afterwards. And so here is one of the recordings I did with Ornette.
Lloyd Haber and Ornette Coleman. A private jam session heard on KCR thanks to Mr. Haber himself. So let's continue, Lloyd, on with some of the other cats you've played with, and specifically Omar Kabir, who you founded the Freedom Art Quartet with in 1991.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what led you to form the band, and why then?
Well, I started writing music, I guess, in the mid to late 80s. And I had a quartet playing where myself on vibraphone, Sarah Hummel on drums, Yutaka Honda on tenor saxophone, and Brian Leanwand on bass. I think our first gig was at the Angry Squire, which was on 7th Avenue.
That's a fabulous name for your venue. I like that.
And so yeah, I started writing music again with the inspiration from being around all this creative music. I used to go up to Studio Whist and be a fly on the wall as M. Boom would rehearse, or Marion Brown and Douglas Ewart. It was just, I didn't know who these people were when I first met them, but and then I used to go to jam sessions. And there was a place on Long Island in Seaford called Sonny's Place. And there were a lot of places on Long Island back in those days, and you'd go to these jazz clubs and seeing who's playing, and a lot of times Roy Haynes would be hanging out. And because Roy lived on Long Island, I think in Roosevelt at that time, and I would buy Roy a Cavassier, and he would tell me stories. And one time good. I asked Roy, do you give lessons? He's like, every time you come and see me is your lesson.
I like that.
So anyway, that's where I met Omar at this club called Sonny's Place. And what a trumpet player. And I asked him, I've been writing songs. Would you be interested in putting something together? And that's where we met. And we've been through a lot since then. And luckily, once we kind of got a, what did we hear? Our first saxophone player was, our alto was Andrew Joseph, who has since passed. And we had our first gig at the New Music Cafe, which was on Canal and Broadway. Was it West Broadway or Broadway? And that was our first gig with Andy McLeod on bass. And there were lots of places to play back in those days.
And I also want to talk a little bit about the first CD that you made. On Spirits Awake, one of the things that strikes me actually about the CD itself is the label that it's on, Freedom Art Records. Can you talk about why you decided to, release your music through that label instead of...
Instead of what?
Well, I guess you
hello, can you please record my music and release it? Go away, kid, you bother me. So I was like, well, I better do this myself.
And what was it like?
What was it like? Well, I had to go down to the courts and file business papers, starting my own business, and it was and learn how to do everything from scratch. All my CDs, I use my father's paintings as the CD covers. I've had three I released. The second, these two Freedom Art Quartets, and the group Bones and Tones, which I didn't bring with me today, but which is myself on marimba, Warren Smith on vibraphone, Abdul Mboop on percussion, and Jaribu Shahid is on bass on Bones and Tones. But this was the first release on Freedom Art Records, Spirits Awake. I was blessed to have met Jaribu Shahid when I went to see my friend Eli Fontaine playing at some spot down in the village. And I remember Rod Williams was on piano, and Jaribu was playing bass. And I never met him before. I didn't know who he was, but it turned out that he lived right around the corner from me.
What a small world.
It was pretty amazing. He lived right around the corner from me, and by that time I needed a bass player. Because our bass player we were using it for quite a long while, Andrew Hall, had moved on to other things, and asked Jaribu if he wanted to join the band, and and he was with us for quite a while until he moved back to Detroit.
Let's have a listen to Spirits Awake. Is there any track in particular that you'd select?
How about Timeshare is a fun one.
Timeshare it is. Once again, this is Spirits Awake, the first release from the Freedom Art Quartet. Abraham Burton on tenor saxophone, Omar Kabir on trumpet and flugelhorn, Jaribu Shahid on bass, and Lloyd Haber on drums, and they are joined by Douglas Yates on alto saxophone. from Spirits Awake, the debut album of the Freedom Art Quartet. That was the 7th track, Timeshare. Abraham Burton on tenor saxophone, Omar Kabir on trumpet and flugelhorn, Jaribu Shahid on bass, and Lloyd Haber, our very special guest in the studio here today, on drums, featuring Douglas Yates on the alto sax. Now, you've mentioned how you met several of these cats, Omar and Jaribu. How did you meet Abraham Burton?
So I would take lessons with Charlie Persip at Studio Whis. But sometimes Studio Whis wasn't always available. And we'd have to do lessons somewhere else. A few times I'd do lessons at Air Studios, which was owned by Henry Threadgill, Steve McCall, and Fred Hopkins. But the more frequent alternative would be at Freddie Waite's studio, which was at Westbeth. And that's where I first met Freddie Waits, and who was just a wonderful person. And a lot of times his son, Nasheed, would be hanging out. And Nasheed would run with Eric McPherson and Abraham Burton. And at that time, they were all in high school. And
my goodness.
And that was the crew, the three, those three guys. And then I'd rehearse. I was able, so luckily, I was able to rehearse my band either at Studio Whis or at Freddie Waite's studio, or Nasheed's studio. And that's where we got to hang out, and we jammed together and play together. And eventually I asked Abraham if he wanted to play with us, and he played with us maybe a year and a half, 2 years. We did some nice gigs together. We had a steady weekly gig at some place in Soho. For a while, we played around town, and yeah, I had different cats through the band. Alex Harding played with us for a little bit. He was a regular, and yeah, that's how I met Abraham.
Before we continue with the most recent variations and the current iteration of the Freedom Art Quartet, I also want to sort of give a wink to some of the other bands you're a part of. You are in. You wear many hats in terms of what you do for Freedom Art and for other bands. So there's Eurasica with...
Okay, so it's Eurasica.
Eurasica, excuse me. Oh, like Eurasia. That makes more sense.
Like Europe, Asia, and Africa. Okay, I'm the European. Okay, I play percussion and hand pans and drums. My wife, whose name is Alice, is a vocalist, and she also plays a Chinese string instrument called guzheng. And on woodwinds, flute, and saxophone is Andrew Lamb. We haven't recorded yet. I would love. That's next. That's next on the books, to record this unique ensemble. We've done a couple of live gigs, but it's not easy. It's to find gigs with this kind of band, because it's not jazz per se. It's a mixture of this and that. My wife sings Chinese folk songs over improvised music, is what it is.
That's epic. It's what it really is.
But I do have a video of the band, some gigs that we played at, and yeah, we're going to be playing on June 20th at the Andrew Friedman Home, which is on the Grand Concourse in the Bronx, and this is an amazing place. It's a mansion that takes up a whole city block. And
not too shabby.
And we're playing in this beautiful library. It's made out of wood. and it's going to be preceded by an interview with Warren Smith, who is promoting his autobiography. So he'll be talking about interviewing. I think Rod Williams will be interviewing Warren Smith, and Warren Smith will be signing books. So I think we start at 8 o'clock, and Eurasica will be playing. I think we'll also have a poet there.
Can I also ask you, you mentioned all the instruments you play for Eurasica, including the handpan and the instrument, the Chinese string instrument that your wife plays. And unusual instruments are something you're sort of a pro at. Can you tell me, like, how you discovered all of these different instruments that you play?
Well, so Warren Smith is a master percussionist. And I studied drums with Charlie Persip, and Charlie Persip recommended, well, why don't you come? He told me about Jazzmobile, which was this wonderful school up on 127th, and Saturday afternoons, I guess it would be from like 11 to 4, you'd go to Jazzmobile, and there would be these amazing teachers there. John Hendricks would be there, Frank West, Frank Foster, Jimmy Owens, all these amazing people giving their time to help young people. And so I didn't want to, Charlie Persip and Warren, Freddie Waits were the teachers there. And I'm already studying drums with Charlie, so I was like, well, let me learn vibraphone, because maybe if the more instruments I play, the better opportunity I'll have for gigs. And Wilson Morman was the vibraphone teacher there, and that's where I started studying. And sometimes Jay Hogarth would teach, and Steve Nelson would teach. And I remember one time Milt Jackson came in to hang out, and Warren Smith. I played with Warren Smith's Composers Workshop Orchestra eventually, and we'd switch off on vibraphone and drums. And Warren Smith had all these wonderful percussion instruments, and marimbas and vibraphones and gongs and this and that. Don't become a percussionist. You got too much stuff. So yeah, that's how that happened.
And now let's get to the main event here, the newest Freedom Art Quartet album, First Dance. The first thing that I'd like to ask you about is the title.
Well, First Dance was the first song that I ever wrote. So I called it First Dance. And I've been playing it for a long time, but finally recorded it. Put it to wax or metal or whatever it is.
So the first tune you ever wrote, First Dance, on the second Freedom Art Quartet album, occupies the last spot on the track list. I like that.
There you go.
And let's also talk a little bit about who the Freedom Art Quartet is now. So you, Lloyd Haber, are constant with Omar Kabir.
Yes, and I met Adam Lane at a place in Bushwick where that had they used to have experimental bands. I was playing with Patrick Brennan's group, and Adam Lane was on a different group, and he was playing, and his playing just was like amazed me. I was like, oh, I would love to play with him. And Adam Lane, Alfredo Colon was recommended me by Jamaluddin Takuma, who was the bassist in Primetime with Ornette Coleman. And I met Jamaluddin at Ornette's, where we played together. And so he recommended Alfredo, and I had a gig set up at Smalls, and Spike Wilner offered us a gig. And I put this group together, and it just sounded so natural and felt so good. I was like, we got to record this, Omar. And this is the result.
With the four of you having had so many, what I can imagine to be so many good stories. I mean, you've already told us some about Charlie Persip, Ornette Coleman, Ed Blackwell. Omar played with David Murray, Cecil Taylor, Herbie Mann, Alfredo, notably with Lee Konitz, but also with Dr. Lonnie Smith, and Adam Lane with Anthony Braxton, with Badada Leo Smith. Do you ever just sit around and tell stories?
Well, with my good friend Anton Reed, we tell stories. Anton Reed he kind of ran Studio Whis, and he was Max Roach's right-hand man, you could say. And he also worked with Toshiko Akiosho. I'm sorry, I know how to pronounce it. That orchestra as the road manager. And this guy has so many stories, and we became best of friends. It's Anton Reed, and he's doing the production for June 20th at the Andrew Friedman home. He does production. He's just an amazing character and has so many stories. But otherwise, when the musicians get together, when we get together, nobody has time to hang out. Everybody's got somewhere to go, so we try to get in the 3-hour rehearsal and then see you later.
Maybe let's have a listen, actually, before we talk any further about this album. Any picks?
Let's see, what would you like? Why don't we start with U.S. Blues, Inc. That's the second track. It's a blues, as it says, and has a little twist to it.
We are listening to First Dance, the second recorded album of the Freedom Art Quartet. Omar Kabir on trumpet, flugelhorn, seashells, and didgeridoo. Don't get to say that one much. Alfredo Colon on alto sax, Adam Lane on bass, and Lloyd Haber on drums and percussion. That was U.S. Blues, Inc., recorded August 23rd and 24th of 2023 at Bayside Studios, Lloyd's home studio, and engineered by Omar Kabir, produced and mixed by Lloyd Haber and Omar Kabir. All songs by Lloyd Haber, except for one that I'm not sure we'll have time to get to today. But tell us about, Lloyd, if you will, how this tune was constructed, how you thought of the twist.
The time signatures? Well, it's not something that you think about. It just writing songs. They come from different places, but it comes from a greater, from something that you can't explain, from the ether. But different things can inspire a song. From different songs could inspire a song. Listening to inspiration from different artists can inspire writing songs, or it could be a rhythmic rhythm that you hear out in the street, like car horns or people talking in a conversation. You hear a certain kind of rhythm going on in a conversation, and a melody will come over that. When you walk down the street and everybody is so occupied on their phones or has earbuds in their heads, and they don't listen to the sounds of the environment. Where that is, I get a lot of inspiration from just the sounds of the environment. Well, so this was probably a rhythm, something that I heard, and it's not until I sit down and write it out, says, oh, this is in this how this rhythm goes like this. This will fit in like this, and it's not something that you consciously say, I want to write something, in 6 or 8 or this or that. It just turns out that way when you want to put it on paper so other people can read your music.
I love that the idea that being connected to your environment, because I think sometimes inspiration seems, it does really come from the ether. It's so sort of like amorphous, but it does seem like it's sort of swirling around you. So the more in touch you are with sound, on a broad level, I like that inspires.
So it doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes you have to consciously say, okay, I want to write a song. I mean, I've done that before. Okay, I'm going to go here. I'm going to write a song, and you'll fool around on your instrument and see what comes out. Sometimes that works.
That's a lot of fun.
It comes from different places and different inspirations. Yeah.
So this is only the second recorded album, right, of the Freedom Art Quartet, but as we've hinted at in our conversation, it's been a working band for a long time.
Well, on and off, yes. But there was a time when Omar Kabir moved to Germany, and Drew Shahid moved back to Detroit. So there was kind of it's not easy to find people to play this kind of music and to read this kind of music. And the thing about Omar is he's a wonderful reader and musician, and he knows all my songs by heart. So he's an integral part of this, and it's very difficult to do Freedom Art Quartet without him. So I used to go to Germany, and we used to do gigs in Germany, and we had lots of fun and wonderful times in Germany, and it was the first time of seeing how appreciative the Europeans are of this music. People would come up to me after a gig and they'd hug me and with tears in their eyes say, "Thank you so much for the music." I'm like, what? Like, what am I doing? What am I doing here? I got to move to Europe. but Omar has since moved back to the States, and you know, it's tough because there are less and less places to play these days, and there's not after COVID a lot of places shut down, and vying for gigs is it's tough, and for club owners to accept you and this kind of music. There used to be more of a variety of places to play. We used to play at the Knitting Factory quite often. Michael Dorff was very generous in having us at his club and being part of the Heineken Jazz Festival. But we keep on trying, because what else are you gonna do? Gotta play that music.
You told us about the gigs in Germany, and of course now Omar is back in the U.S., and that opens the door to some gigs right here.
Right, June 21st. We're going to be at the Soapbox Gallery on Dean Street in Brooklyn. We're going to play one set from 8 o'clock, and joining us now. So my teacher, Makanda Ken McIntyre, he said, "So you want to be a band leader, huh? You're going to be a band leader. Well, you have to remember this: one monkey don't spoil the bunch." And But you learn about these things. For instance, this gig at the Soapbox Gallery on the 21st, Adam Lane couldn't make the gig, and I'm blessed to know Eric Wheeler, who is an amazing bass player and happens to be my son's bass teacher. And Eric's always on and off the road, and he happened to have a free night. So I'm joyous to have him playing with the Freedom Art Quartet. And then just a few days ago, Alfredo Colon told me that he couldn't make the gig. So I was like, okay, Omar, who are we going to do? Who are we going to use? And luckily, our old friend Jay Rodriguez, who has played with the Freedom Art Quartet once before, will be able to join us. So it should be an exciting night of fun, composed and spontaneous music at the Soapbox Gallery.
Just brimming with anticipation over here. Why don't you take us out with one more recorded tune?
Okay, why don't we do Counterbalance? That's a fun one.
Counterbalance from the Freedom Art Quartet's First Dance. That was Counterbalance, the third tune from First Dance, the second CD recorded August 23rd and 24th, 2023 of the Freedom Art Quartet. That's Omar Kabir on trumpet, flugelhorn, seashells, and didgeridoo. Alfredo Colon on alto saxophone, Adam Lane on bass, and Lloyd Haber on drums and percussion. Thank you so much, Lloyd, for taking us through today.
Thank you, Rachel. It was a pleasure meeting you, and for WKCR for having me. This isn't the first time that I've been here playing music and promoting, and it's so wonderful to have this opportunity to present my music to the people out there listening, and hopefully you enjoy the album and check out the rest of it. The album and buy a CD so you can. People don't. It's so difficult to navigate this business of music. So there you go. Thank you so much.
Of course, the pleasure was mine. Now my appetite is already kind of whet for this CD, so let's go for Nature of the Past. First Dance, the title tune from the latest Freedom Art Quartet CD. If you're interested in getting one of these bad boys for yourself, you can do that at faqmusic.com or freedomartrecords.com. Once again, First Dance, that was Omar Kabir on trumpet, flugelhorn, seashells, and didgeridoo. Alfredo Colon on alto sax, Adam Lane on bass, and Lloyd Haber on drums and percussion, and together they are the Freedom Art Quartet. My name is Rachel Smith, and you are listening to Out to Lunch, the weekday afternoon jazz show here on WKCR FM New York and WKCR HD 89.9 on the FM dial in the New York metropolitan area.